Hi, I'm Nalini Haynes, and this is Dark Magazine's podcast, putting Shivaun Plozza in the limelight. Shivaun has a bachelor's and a master's degree in creative writing and a second master's degree in publishing and communications from Melbourne University, as well as a graduate diploma in education. Anyone would think she's a professional academic. She's interned at Penguin, Melbourne University Publishing and Writers Victoria, as well as freelancing as an editor and manuscript assessor while volunteering and organising a conference. Her day job is a project editor for the History Teachers Association of Victoria. She's had a number of short stories published, and recently Shivaun's debut novel, Frankie, was published by Penguin. In short, Shivaun has seen both sides of the publishing divide as a writer and editor. Welcome, Shivaun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know, as I just said, you've worked on both sides of the publishing divide. What's more rewarding, being a writer or an editor/manuscript assessor?
I don't know whether you can separate them both. I mean, obviously, my number one passion's always been writing, and that since the age of 14 was always what I wanted to do. But I found that when I moved into the editing and assessing side, that actually it opened up a lot about my writing and understanding how I write and understanding the process in ways that I would never have understood if I just sort of focused on myself as a writer. So I've sort of found that they both really feed well into each other, because it's really difficult to be critical about yourself as a writer. But when you work as an assessor and an editor and you're being critical in a constructive way of other people's writing, you begin to hone that language that you need to use and that eye that you have for working out what's not working, and it becomes just that little bit easier to turn it around on yourself. So I just find they're so interconnected. And I think you do find a lot of writers do work in some sort of way, whether it's just sort of communications, even in the corporate side of communications and that sort of thing. They've all sort of got that complementary side of writing. They sort of found a way to complement their writing with those sort of jobs. So I think they just sort of feed naturally into each other, and they're both important. But if I had to choose between the two, obviously writing is the number one passion. So I think that I get more reward out of that, just because you can't really beat being creative. It's just the best thing in the world.
Yes. So what's the most difficult thing about being a writer and the most difficult thing about being an editor or manuscript assessor?
The easy one to answer that is what's most difficult about being an editor and a manuscript assessor, and that's finding a way to give criticism in a way that's not going to completely destroy someone, because all writers know that we're generally very sensitive, and this is something that someone has worked on for years and years and years. It's their passion project, but then this random person to come along and say, well, actually it's not very good, that's a really crushing thing to do, and it's going to be really difficult to accept that everything about your work is not perfect. So the hardest thing is actually being able to provide feedback that's not crushing, but actually still is helpful and is honest. That's a really difficult thing to do. In terms of writing, and that's a little bit harder, because it's such you hear so many writers sort of talk about actually the process of writing, even though we love it, is really difficult. It's really soul destroying a lot of the time. It's really difficult just to sit at the desk and make yourself write, and those periods you go through, you just think, oh, everything I'm writing is terrible, I hate it so much, why am I even bothering? The whole process of it is actually a really difficult thing to do, to actually find the one thing in particular that's difficult about it is sort of hard to pin down, because most of the time everything feels difficult about it. But I think probably the most difficult thing, and because I've been thinking about this recently, because I'm sort of part way through my second novel, it's working out the point at which it's finished. It's that moment of, is this good enough to send on to someone to say, hey, do you want to publish this? It's that moment of, can I do any more to this? Because we always want to fiddle. I mean, there's bits in Frankie that I still want to change. We never want to stop writing, and it's working at that moment when actually you're no longer being constructive, you're actually being really, really destructive with your own writing. I think that's one of the hardest things to do.
What's the best part of both roles?
So the best part about manuscript assessing is when you do face-to-face consultations with people, and the person that you've given this potentially a heartbreaking assessment to says, okay, how do I fix it? And they just, there's that the moment of just engagement with that drafting and that process of actually fixing your work. And then you really get into that with that person, and you feel their passion, and that sort of that moment of where you're not sure whether you've completely, broken their heart over it and they're just going to throw it away. That moment they go, okay, I've accepted that there's things that need to be worked on. What do we do next? That moment's always a real little buzz. You think, right, okay, we're into this now. With writing, it's hard to say, because there's actually, as I said, that there's all sorts of horrible things about writing, but there's all sorts of little great moments. I mean, as a published writer now, I've got a whole new lot of wonderful moments about it, like the first time you see your book in a bookshop. That's pretty exciting.
And you see your book in a photograph in Central Park, New York.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I was just going to say, like, when you get contacted by people that you don't actually know that have read your book or photographed your book and that sort of thing. So because you kind of expect that your family and your friends are going to read it, and they send you pictures, and it's wonderful. When someone you've got no idea, you've never met them before, but they felt so inspired by reading your book that they thought, I'll contact this person and let them know, that's incredibly rewarding. That's probably one of the best bits.
Huge buzz.
Yes.
How do you balance your day job with writing?
Interesting, because in your intro you said, yeah, I had a day job. Yesterday was actually my last day of my day job. It was only a part-time job. I only had 3 days a week, but I've just got so much freelance work now coming in that I was working sort of 24/7, 7 days a week, and something had to give. And I thought, why not give it a go, see whether I can balance freelance work with the writing. That way I can hopefully have sort of periods where there's lots of freelance work, sort of work steadily on that, and then give myself whole chunks of period just to write, because that's generally how I work. I need a good sort of 3-month sort of period of nothing else to get a first draft done. Then I like to go off and work steadily on some other things to take my mind off it, and then I'll go back and work. But I find it really difficult to multitask when it comes to writing and work and that sort of thing. I've always found that really difficult. So yes, I'll just do little bursts of things at a time. That's my process.
Well, tell us about your debut novel, Frankie.
Right, so I'll wave it around in case anyone hasn't seen it, because I'm really completely in love with the cover. So it's about a really, really angry 17-year-old girl, and when I say angry, I mean will punch you in the face angry. She's not just, going to argue with you a little bit. She will actually lash out at you.
And she actually did punch,
yes,
someone in the face.
Yes.
With the book.
With the book, yes. And threatens to beat up an awful lot of people throughout the process of the book as well. But she's got, you can kind of understand where the anger comes from with her, because she was abandoned by her mother when she was 4, and sort of grown up in a very sort of low socioeconomic household, and has struggled her whole life, and really been held back by that sense of abandonment. So when a 14-year-old boy turns up saying that he's her half-brother, they share the same mother, she sort of lets her defences down, because she's attracted to the idea of having this family, this something that she's never actually had in her life. But then he vanishes, and no one seems to care that he's gone. And so she takes it upon herself to search for him, and in the process discovers some pretty devastating truths about her own life.
One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of YA is that books that are set in a contemporary world, they tend to have characters who are like, oh, I'm so badly off, I'm so, because I'm not a cheerleader, or I don't have the latest, most expensive fashions and toys and stuff. But Frankie has a definite gritty realism where it really feels like you're coming from the wrong side of the tracks myself, coming from a low socioeconomic background myself. Frankie had a real authenticity as someone who isn't privileged. How did you manage to bring that authenticity to the story?
Yeah, I mean, and that is a really interesting point that you make, because we were talking about this on the YA squad, how this idea of poverty in YA is often the parents are struggling to send their kids to private school, and they're struggling because they don't have, as you said, like the latest game or the best clothes and stuff like that. And it is really a very middle class, like a lower middle class sort of version of apparent poverty and stuff. But we know, sort of, if you open your eyes and look around, we know that that's actually not what genuine poverty is. And for me, it was, I used to work as a secondary school teacher, and I worked a bit in the welfare as well. And in particular, when I worked in London, I was a sort of a supply teacher, so an emergency teacher there. And you only really go to the schools in the most disadvantaged areas. And so I saw an awful lot of genuine poverty in those areas, and I saw kids that were struggling, that come from really difficult backgrounds and were really struggling. So you'd walk into a classroom, and normally when I've been teaching back in Australia, you'd have a few sort of kids that had some issues. You'd walk into a classroom there though, and the majority of your classroom were really angry, really upset about what was going on in their lives, and acting out in the classroom. So it was a real eye-opener, and I didn't always feel particularly safe in some of the areas and stuff, but it was definitely something I thought, this is a problem on so many levels, but also just for me as a writer and what I'm reading, I'm not seeing any of these kids in any of these books that I'm reading. It might have been maybe I wasn't reading widely enough, but definitely in particular because the American YA books were really big at that time, and I was reading a lot of those ones, and I was just like, if you're one of these kids, there's nothing for you anywhere in literature. Where do you find yourself? I mean, we've been talking a lot about we need diverse books, but I think class gets left out of that discussion all too much. And that was the sort of the things that I was thinking about. And then sort of looking at, how does that play out in their lives? And then sort of looking at that, not only through the character of Frankie, but looking at the idea of how much value wider society places on these kids, and looking at that via the idea of the missing kid, and that sort of looking at that side by side with a kid who's missing from Malvern, which is a generally sort of an affluent sort of suburb. He gets the attention, Frankie's brother doesn't, sort of exploring it through that area. But really it was just about my exposure to these kids that were going through these things that I grew up on a sheep farm. We didn't particularly have a lot of money or anything, but we survived, and everything wasn't too bad and stuff. And I always thought that was fairly low rung, but you sort of get out there in the world and you go to different places and stuff, and you think, I've got nothing, I'm so privileged. And it made me feel particularly aware of my privilege and wanting to do something about it. If I've got this position of privilege, I can perhaps put something out there that's for these kids that really don't have that position at the moment. And hopefully in the future, the more that people of privilege can put these stories out there, that will allow these kids to actually rise up and create their own stories. Because that's the end thing. We don't want to hear this stuff from me. This is sort of the starting point, and then hopefully, these kids can actually come out and tell their own stories. That's hopefully what can happen.
I have never forgotten Richard Flanagan.
Yes.
Oh. He came to my daughter's school, and it was like the second worst or third worst high school in Queensland.
Yeah.
And he spoke at the end of the assembly, and he's someone who comes from an underprivileged background, and he spoke to those kids, and it was this was 1999, and I've never forgotten it. I've forgotten bits of his speech, but I was just I've loved him ever since. So seeing more of that would be awesome. But you've done such a good job with Frankie. It rings so true. Now, you've very recently hosted a Twitter chat session about YA. Now, instead of me asking the usual questions about your likes and influences, I've stolen your PTA for YA questions to turn them on to you.
Oh dear, okay.
First of all, can you tell us what your goals were when you were hosting this YA chat on Twitter?
Yeah, my number one thing was to put the girls to the front because, and I'm guilty of this myself to a certain extent, but there's a lot of focus in YA stories on the boys that we love and blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of assumptions in that. There's an assumption that, there's sort of the heterosexual assumption that's there, and again, there's this. YA is predominantly written by women who've got a large proportion of female characters, but you seem to be focusing on these male romance characters and I think giving them the most attention. And so it was really just about, let's just step back for a moment and actually focus on the girls in YA, the girls that are our heroes, the girls that make us laugh, and the girls we aspire to be, and just sort of put them at the front, in a way that's going to, that's sort of the point of having these strong female roles in YA, so that we can talk about them and that girls can see themselves in these characters, or see the kind of person they want to be and aspire to be, and sort of, and sort of break that glass ceiling sort of thing, I suppose. So that was the number one focus. I just girls to the front, it's the sort of the inspiration behind it.
Yes, and I've noticed that Will Kostakis, I think I've pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
He's played a fairly prominent role in your Twitter stream as well, and he's written. I think he's written 3 books, but I've only read 2 of them. I read the
4
first.
he's written.
Oh, 4. Well, I've missed 2. I must get the other 2. I absolutely loved and adored the first 3, and then most recently Sidekicks, about among other things, about a character who was coming out of the closet as gay. And then he came out of the closet himself. So he's somebody who's had the experience, and he's written a really authentic minority character and done a brilliant job.
Yeah, I love that book so much. Yeah, and it's the funny thing about that book is because you've got the 3 different characters, all got their own focus, and I loved it, but I was also like, but I want these to be 3 separate books, because I want to explore these characters so much more. It was one of those books that you really think, but I want more. I want to know more about Ryan. I want to know more about Harley and Miles and stuff. So it was, hopefully they get their own stories maybe in the future. I don't know, I might have to have a word with him.
Yeah, that would be really good. Okay, what is your favourite F word and why? I hear it's not Frankie.
No, it's not Frankie. It's, I do love Frankie, but my favourite F word would definitely be feminism, because I don't know how you can not appreciate that word and appreciate all it means for men and women and everyone in this society. I think it's such an important thing, and I think it's sort of been hijacked in a lot of ways to mean all sorts of things that it literally doesn't mean. And I think it's so important for young women to grow up with understanding of what feminism means. It's not about hating men. It's not about being better than anyone else or anything like that. It's just literally about equality, and that's never going to be a bad thing. Yeah.
And who are your favourite girls in YA?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know how I could. Taylor from On the Jellicoe Road would be up there as one of my number ones, because that's one of my favourite books. Melina Marchetta is just amazing. It's just, you can't, unless you've read her work, it's really difficult to explain. Just not only is the quality of her language so strong, but just the characters and the relationships between characters is just, it gets you in the heart every single time. She's so good at that. So Taylor is definitely probably my favourite Melina character, so she'd be up there. Oh gosh, so many. I came very, very late to the Vampire Academy series, and I did not expect to like it. I did not want to like it. And I really got into Rose as a character because she's so very strong, doesn't take any crap from anyone. And she's just this amazing heroine that I sort of wasn't seeing in any of these other sort of supernatural books at the time. Here was this girl that was saving the day. She's the one that goes out and saves the guy instead of the guy having to save her. So I actually think that even though, it's not the best quality writing in the world, but it's a lot of fun, and she's a really strong character. I think she's a really great role model for young girls as well. And I could go on, but you probably don't want me to go on for hours about all the girls that I love, but there's just so many. I think Australian YA in particular, I think we're so strong at YA here in Australia that really I could just list all Australian characters and novels. I could go on about that just purely for ages, because we just do, in particular, we do contemporary really well. We do diversity reasonably well. We've got areas where we can definitely improve, but I think we're well ahead of a lot of the other countries when it comes to diversity. So yeah, I could go on for ages about that, but I will stop now.
Well, if you'd like to send me a list, I'll put it in the post.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be great. Thank you. So, in the interest of equity, who are your favourite boys in YA?
Oh, well, I'll give Will a shout out and say that Harley was my favourite from the sidekicks, because we often get that whole bad boy character from the main, like they're not the main character, they're the love interest or whatever else they are, and we get them through someone else's point of view. So it was really nice to actually read his part of the story from his point of view. And I think what Will did with his voice was really complex and really fantastic. I mean, I loved Ryan as well, especially because of what he was going through with coming out and that sort of thing. But Harley, I think in particular, spoke to me, and I thought that's really interesting because we just don't hear that point of view character in a lot of stories. I would also say that I'm a big Jacqueline Moriarty fan, and her Colours of Madeline series, Elliot, from that, I'm a massive fan of. It was just it's a very unique story. He was, I think, a really unique male character, really complex, I think, in a way that a lot of male characters don't get to be. They can be a little bit superficial, I guess, because they're often cast as that sort of romantic lead and they never really get that complex emotional life. But Elliot, I think, had a very complex emotional life and a very complex character arc over that series. So he was a really great character to read. Again, I could go on, but I might send you a list of that as well.
If you were in danger, which YA heroine would you want to come to your rescue?
I think, and I can't remember her name, but Beauty Queens by Libba Bray. I think any of those girls from that book. So have you read that one?
No, I haven't.
So it's pitched as America's Next Top Model meets Lost, but that doesn't give it justice. It's basically a bit of a sort of a feminist parody. Sort of these girls that are in this sort of pageant have a plane accident and they crash on this island, and then there's some funny stuff about society. Basically, this society is set up to promote beauty and to have women sort of hate themselves and be competitive towards each other and all that sort of thing. So it really parodies the beauty industry and just the way that society is set up against women in a lot of ways. But these beauty queens rise up and take on the status quo, and it's hilarious. It's one of the funniest books you read. But any of those girls, I think, were fantastic. But I can't remember the main character's name, which is really bad of me. But I think, yes, I would definitely like one of those beauty queens to save me.
Top Model meets Lost is enough to put me off, but you sold me. I think I need to read it now.
No, it's definitely a parody. It's definitely a parody.
Sounds great. Which YA girl would make the best friend?
Oh, I should have thought more about these questions when I was asking them what I would answer. So many. I might go back to Colours of Madeline series and choose Madeline. Just in particular, all the kids in that book were super intelligent, but in a way that didn't seem unrealistic. They were sort of interesting, eccentric, and just the sort of people that you wanted to have a conversation with. And of course, they were doing really fantastic, interesting things. That helps. I always wanted to go on a few more adventures in my life. But Madeline, I think, is super intelligent. She's really obsessive about the things that she's interested in. So she was really obsessed with Newton and sort of really obsessed with science and that sort of thing in a really interesting sort of way. And I've always been someone in high school, I didn't know that science was this fascinating subject. It was not taught in a way that made it fascinating. And it wasn't until later in life that I think it was probably Douglas Adams that was the gateway for me. Just the stuff that he did with sort of like quantum physics and stuff, and sort of mixing that around in his writing. And I was like, this is actually amazing stuff. So that anyone that's actually fascinated by science and that sort of that crossover of philosophy and science, I'm always really interested in those sorts of people and would love to have that sort of conversation with them. So, and Madeline as this fascinating teenage character, I think would, if I was a teenager still, I would want to be best friends with her, I think, and have those sort of interesting conversations.
That sounds great. When I was in high school, I was reading all sorts of really good science fiction. No one told me that the science theories that I was reading were actually real science.
Yes, I know.
Until I was in my 20s, and I thought science was incredibly boring. If somebody had told me that Heisenberg and Schrodinger and people like that were actually real people and these were real scientific theories, I'd be a physicist today.
Yes, I'm the same, absolutely. Just there's so much they could be doing with high school science that revealing how exciting and interesting a subject it actually is, but I was bored. And I gave it up really early.
I had a friend in Hobart, and I'll tell you what, I really wish I had her as a science teacher. She said that the curriculum says that they have to learn how to use a pipette and a Bunsen burner and things like that. So what we actually did in science had very little relationship to the actual curriculum.
Yeah.
And she was doing things like getting her class to test the absorbency of toilet paper and the effectiveness of hair dye and all sorts of real-world applications using this. It's like, wow, I wanted to go back to high school just to do science with her.
I'm sure there were fantastic teachers of science, but unfortunately, where I was, it wasn't the most exciting application of science in the classroom. So I think that's, I think a lot of kids sort of went through that and gave up science far too early.
Yeah, absolutely. What characteristics do you like to see in female YA characters?
And I would have to just preface this by saying that my answer is not going to be half as good as the answers that the girls and boys on PTA chat gave, because their answers to this particular question were really fantastic. So listen to what I'm about to say, but then go and actually look through it's PTA for YA for the numeral. Read back over it, because the answers that they gave were all really fantastic. And I'll probably just sort of steal a few things that I remember what they said, but basically sense of humour is the number one thing, because just me, I like reading characters that have a really great sense of humour, and I think too often sense of humour is not something that's given to the girl characters in books. They're the serious ones and they're all, upset about things and stuff, but girls are funny as, and it's just, I want them to have that characteristic that's denied them. And I think girls that are not waiting around to be saved are always fantastic. Girls that are actually proactive, let's get out there and actually let's solve this problem. And because too often the female characters are put in that reactive role. And even, actually, I saw this really fascinating thing it was on Twitter or Facebook the other day, where it had a breakdown of films that had really strong female characters. So I remember that Guardians of the Galaxy was one of the examples. What it actually broke down, that they had these, is the idea of the female that's the sidekick who's actually always showing up the male, with how much smarter and more kick-ass she is, but she's still always the one who gets caught by the bad guy, and she's the one who has to be rescued by this actually fairly inept hero. And it was actually this massive list, and I couldn't get over the size of the list. And I thought it's actually incredibly true that you do see this in stories and in films and whatnot. We do have these girls that are given that role in a very superficial way, that they're allowed to be wisecracking and they're allowed to make an idiot out of the guy at certain points, but when it comes down to it, they're still the ones that are getting into the trouble, and they're still the ones that are having to be rescued, because we can't seem to get over the fact that actually, no, the girls can do the rescuing. The girls probably don't even need to worry about what the guys are doing. They can solve things themselves, and that's still a really big part of storytelling, and that's the part I think we need to sort of focus on now.
So more Buffy.
Exactly, more Buffy. Buffy was really ahead of her times in so many ways, and it's in some ways it was fantastic, because I think as a whole generation or two of women that grew up with Buffy, and that are sort of understand what that meant, and were able to sort of look at her as a character and feel inspired by that. But it's also, you kind of want it to be sort of happening now a little bit. I'm trying to think of, are there any film or television female characters that are Buffy-esque? Jessica Jones, I haven't seen that series yet, but people have been talking about that like it might be. Have you seen it?
I've seen it. I've watched the whole first season. I burned through it.
Yeah.
It's really good. It could be challenging, like triggery for people who've been in abusive relationships, because she's had this abusive relationship with a villain who comes back and is stalking her.
Yeah.
But it's so well done. Some people don't like it, and it's interesting because the people who don't like it tend to be male.
Yeah.
They tend not to relate to that kind of abusive relationship. And, and that's not to say that, like, some men like it. My partner loves it. But my son hates it.
Yeah.
And, but I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And okay, I wouldn't say that it's perfect.
Yeah.
But I thought overall it was really good, and I liked the way it finished.
Yeah, okay. It's on my list of, when I have some free time, which is very rare, I will actually sit down and watch the whole thing. It's definitely on my radar, but yeah.
Well, it was a single season story made without any expectation of a sequel, and now I believe it's going to be a sequel, and she's going on to feature in The Defenders. But it means that you can watch, I think it's 10 episodes, and you get the whole story.
Yeah.
Which is really good. And I like the TV series better than the comics. What storylines do you want to see more of in YA?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the whole idea of a lot more female agency, girls that are proactive and saving the day and that sort of thing. I think that storyline needs to play out a lot more. Obviously, a lot more diversity on every single level that we possibly can, and hopefully from more diverse writers as well, because I think we have to be really careful that in promoting diversity, that it's not just a heap of white privileged voices that are saying, yes, we need more diversity and let's go and write these books, and we're actually taking away the spots from people who actually are coming from a diverse experience. That they get to actually tell their stories. And I think that's more important, because there's only so much that I'm going to know about experiences that aren't my own, and I'm not going to do as good a job as someone who's actually gone through that themselves. And I would like to see, I've been really struggling, because sometimes I like a little bit of fluff. I like a little bit of just, like a friendship story, or just a sort of quite sort of nice, fluffy coming of age sort of story. And it's funny that the author of Frankie, which is very gritty and dark and full of issues and ideas, is saying this, but I actually would like to see just a little bit more of just sort of a nice, personal, light, friendship base, that sort of thing. Just a nice little casual, easy read and stuff, because I think, we don't really have sort of really enough of that, and I've been really struggling to find some good examples of that sort of really good quality light fluff. I mean, fluff's a really derogatory word, but I mean it I don't mean it in that way, because I want it and I like it.
I would say that Frankie is a meaty story, but and I love it, but still I do like a bit of chocolate. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think what you're saying is the same thing. It's like, well, you've written a meaty story, and you would like dessert. Thank you very much.
And some people want to have dessert first as well, or they just want to eat dessert, and that's fine. And my mum, she's always somebody who wants to go in and just order dessert and skip the main meal, so that's fine. It's I think we need every kind of story out there for every moment that you want it, and for every sort of experience that you want to experience. The wider we can get things, the better it's going to be. And I think on that as well, I would like to see a lot more sort of non-romance based storylines as well, about relationships, but not necessarily romantic relationships, or friendships, or familial sort of relationships and that sort of thing. So I think that there is I mean, yeah, obviously there's a romance element in my story as well, so I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this, but I think there is a little bit too much focus on the idea of romance in YA in a way that I think we have to be very careful about, because you don't want to sort of suggest that that's the be all and end all of your life, is finding the one, especially the one at 17. I mean, my God, whoever imagined the idea of that. I mean, some people, yes, obviously they've met the one. But most of us, I don't think we ever really meet the one. We might read the one that we're happy to spend a certain amount of time with, but there's a lot of pressure, I think, and particularly on young girls, this idea of basing your whole identity around the idea of who you're in a relationship with, and the fact and the idea that having a relationship is the most important thing in the world, when really it's not. It's, you know, it's just one small aspect of you as a human being.
Yeah, I must say that's one of the things I loved about the Cadfael series. So
Which one?
The Cadfael series.
I didn't know that one.
Oh, it's actually not YA. It's written by a woman under the pseudonym of Alice Peters. Cadfael is a medieval monk.
Yeah.
And every story is a murder mystery.
Yeah.
And being a monk, he's not really big on the romance himself.
Yeah.
But minor characters will have a romance. And early on in the series, a very good friend of his, who's like the sheriff of the town, his name is Hugh something, or something, I think it's Hugh something. It's been a while now. But he has a romance and he gets married. But then through the series, you follow the different characters. And while Cadfael and the murder of the book is at the centre of every story, you get to see Hugh and his wife, and they have a child, and they grow up, and they get older, and it's this richness. It's, yes, romance. I think every novel has a romance, but it's a small feature, and there's so much richness in this tapestry that Alice Peters has woven. And I think that I want a lot more of that. Yeah.
Which is what I was trying to do with the romance in Frankie, is that I didn't want it to be the focus of her as a character. I didn't want it to define her. I didn't want her relationship with the male romantic interest to be the, you know, what inspired her to, you know, to do anything at any point, or I wanted her to be the one saving the day, to her to be figuring out things on her own. But also because there was so much negativity that she'd been going through, I also wanted to give her a little sort of a little something potential for the future, that she is able to form some form of relationship with people, because that was one of the things that she was finding difficult, was because of that abandonment from her mother, that how do you connect on a deep level with other human beings if you're terrified the whole time that they're going to leave you? So for me, the romantic element, it was a little bit about her as a character, and just sort of hinting at what she could potentially become. And I never, I don't actually see that relationship lasting particularly long. And that's sort of always been in my head, that really it's just sort of the thing that, you know, it's in that time period, it's going to work for her, but I see her as sort of moving on elsewhere and in the future and stuff. So I never wanted it to be defining her or defining the story. It was just a little element of her life at that time.
It was, the way I read it, it felt a little bit, yes, like a promise of hope, but also maybe a bit like a rebound romance. Not that she'd had a previous romance, but she'd had all this crap.
Yeah.
And you kind of need the rebound romance as part of the healing process to help move on.
Yeah.
And I felt like her friendship with her best friend, who was a girl, was more important, and her relationship with her aunt was
definitely
more important.
Yeah.
So anyway, moving on. What's your favourite friendship relationship between girls in YA?
Oh, wow.
And I've just mentioned one of
mine. Jacqueline Moriarty again, the is it Ashbury High? That series that she does, like feeling sorry for Celia, and finding Cassie crazy. She does female relationships really, really well. So any of those sort of girls from those books would be easy to choose. Trying to think of Taylor's friend. on the Jellicoe Road. What is her name? I can't remember. But those two are really quite cute.
You have a definite theme here. Moriarty and Angelica Road.
Yes. I don't know, yeah, like Jacqueline Moriarty and Melina Marchetta would be, and probably Catherine Jinks would be my three favourite Australian authors. So yeah, I tend to go back to those ladies as, you know, obvious choices. I'll try and think of something outside of those ones. I'm actually finding it difficult to sort of, normally with things I can sort of come off the top of my head, and as I'm thinking through things, I'm thinking there's nothing that I've read, and I'm probably missing out, that's really, the focus has been on the relationship between the two sort of girl characters and that sort of friendship story. So nothing's really sort of jumping out at me. I'm sure I'll sort of go away and I'll look at my bookshelf and I'll go, oh yeah, that one. But in terms of things that are sort of standing out immediately in my head, I'm sort of feeling like, yeah, there might actually be a lack of that, those stories that are focused on the friendship. I mean, obviously, what's that? I've never read it, but there's that Sisterhood of the Travelling Pants. Like, it's sort of that sort of genre. We haven't sort of had that kind of book for quite a while, but yeah, I think we're missing those kind of books, actually. I think are really important. And often when you, in YA in particular, when you're looking at the idea of friendship and stuff, it's usually about friendships that are failing and like bullying sort of style relationships and stuff like that. Where it'd be nice to see a little bit more that's just about girls sticking together, going on adventures, having fun, sort of thing, which sounds a little bit Enid Blyton, maybe I'm getting a little bit old and looking at things from that sort of perspective. But yeah, it'd be nice to have some sort of light girls going on adventures sort of stories out there as well, for maybe for that sort of tween sort of market.
Okay. What would be your favourite YA girls supergroup?
Yeah, again, look at the PTA chat for this one, because I don't know how those girls came up with some really, really amazingly funny answers so quickly. I should have thought about this one, but well, obviously I've got to have Taylor in there. She would be the lead singer, because I can imagine her sort of screaming out in some sort of punk rock girl band sort of group. And actually, I'm going to be really, really cheeky, and I'm going to put Cara, who's the character from my book, Frankie, who's the best friend. I'm going to put her in the band, because I could so see her sort of rocking the drums or something, I think. I will also put in, Lou from Fiona Wood's books. So she featured in a few of Fiona Wood's books. So Six Impossible Things she was in. She's been that one, and then Wildlife. And she wasn't in the last one, was she? So she was in those two. So I put her on bass, I think, and then who can I put on guitar? I can't think of her name. The main girl from Girl Defective, Simone Howe. I'm going to reach across here. Check it. What is her name? This is such a great book. Skylark. Yeah, Sky. So I think I would definitely put Sky in the book. I love Simone House. She's such a fantastic author as well.
I had her as a teacher last year.
Really? She teaches, is it Swinburne?
Well, it was RMIT last year.
RMIT, okay. Yeah. She'd be a fantastic teacher, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and every book that she recommended, I'd give 4 or 5 stars to.
Yeah. Well. It's just, that's what I mean, we're so spoilt for choice for Australian YA writers. It's just, yeah, we're very, very lucky, and I'm not sure that everyone's entirely aware of the amount of amazing YA writers that we have in Australia, and that's kind of why the Love Oz YA movement has sort of come about. Which is, yeah, once you're aware, once you have that sort of in-author, and you discover that one, sort of you find the little connections between the other ones, I think there's so many amazing reads, it's fantastic.
Well, Simone certainly increased my awareness. I mean, I've been running Dark Matter now for 5 years.
Yeah.
But awareness of excellent local authors and awareness of excellent YA
Yeah.
is a bit more specialist, because
Yeah.
I get books from all over the world.
Yeah.
And it's always amusing when I get, puzzles from Belgium and places like that in English, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But Simone really, she really raised my awareness, and she was lending the books out too. So it was like, I had all these review books from publishers. It's like, just borrow this one. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Rosie Chang asks, if Frankie was made into a movie, who would you cast as Frankie and Nat?
I should, full disclosure, Rosie's actually in my writers group. She's actually a very talented writer herself, as she's doing her PhD at the moment at Monash in doing a fantastic project. So, I actually based Nate on a French actor who I'm particularly fond of, Louis Garrel, who not many people have heard of unless you're interested in sort of French cinema. But he did a film called The Dreamers. He was probably in his early 20s when he did it. And that's Nate for me. So even if it's a little bit obscure, I apologise, but definitely if we could go back in time, if I could get a time machine, put me in the TARDIS, I would go back to when he filmed The Dreamers, and I would take him from that and cast him as Nate. Frankie's a little bit difficult though. It's one of those things you just feel, she's such a complex character, it just feels so wrong to actually cast her as anyone, and whether or not they would do justice to my baby. But I did base her physically on a Romanian model / poet / musician. I can get her name wrong. Irana Lazarel, something. I can't remember how to pronounce it. But then she changed it a sort of a fair bit. But I would either want sort of an unknown actress, because I think that would be an ideal, someone that there's no sort of like that sort of complete blank canvas. There's no expectations of what sort of person this is. She could just sort of burst on the scene as 100% Frankie. But someone did ask me this at the YA Squad tour, and when I sort of thought about it, I actually thought, well, if I've got my time machine, if I'm going back to pick up Louis Garrel, I could go back to sort of the 1980s and I could pick up Ali Sheedy from The Breakfast Club. And I think she would do a very good Frankie job as well. So if I had to choose two people, it'd be Ali Sheedy and Louis Garrel.
Finally, who would win, Buffy or Rose from the Vampire Academy?
Oh, look, I had a bit of trouble getting into the Buffy TV series because I loved the film so much. I know the film and the TV series was so different, and I started watching the series and I just wasn't prepared for how different it was compared to the film, because I've loved the film so much. Yeah, Kirsty Swanson or Christy Swanson, I can't remember if it's Kirsty or Christy. She was a great Buffy, and yeah, so it took me a while to get into it, because I gave up initially, and then I sort of revisited it again, because when I went to uni, my undergraduate, there was a lot of Buffy fanatics. And I thought, well, obviously I missed something here. I need to go back and stuff. And I did appreciate it a lot more when I sort of had lost the expectations of the film. But I am still very partial to Rose, because I do really like that series. I think Rose. I'm gonna go with Rose. I know it's a controversial choice for someone, especially of my vintage, who should appreciate Buffy a lot more. But I think Rose, definitely, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, so you've told us a lot about Frankie, and you mentioned that you have another book that you're halfway through writing. Mm-hmm. Would you like to tell us a bit about both the books just before we wrap up?
Well, I don't want to say too much in case it doesn't get picked up or something, and people are saying, what happened to that book that you were talking about? But I am writing another contemporary YA, sort of set in a similar sort of area of Melbourne, and it's not quite as dark as Frankie, but it's probably a little bit more emotional. So So the main character is probably more like me than Frankie, in that she's an overthinker, very anxious, and she's got a lot of guilt. We'll just say that. And it's her working through that guilt. And I'm also working on a middle grade fantasy, which I've been working on for quite a while, and hopefully that one gets finished very soon. And that one's sort of based on Scandinavian folklore, because I've always been really fascinated by Scandinavian folklore, and in particular sort of Danish folklore. So I've sort of taken inspiration from that, but I've sort of taken it in a very sort of fantasy sort of direction as well. So it's not supposed to be read as literally those sort of folk tales, but it's definitely inspired by that sort of thing. So those are the two main projects that I'm working on at the moment.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us today, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a really good conversation, and I hope I made sense.
Oh, definitely.